everyone, welcome to Babies with Knives. Today we're going to be doing a brand new segment called Baby Talk, and we are going to be speaking with Matt Finch, creative director of Frog God Games and creative director of Swords and Wizardry. My name is Alice Peng, aka Lalla Twiddle, and with me is Brandon Powers below. Hey Matt,
Howdy,
how are you
howdy.
going?
Pretty good. How are you guys?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm
I'm
excited to talk to
wonderful.
you about this.
Cool
So,
to talk about it.
yeah. So first off, we know that you have a Kickstarter going right now, correct? For this?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about the mechanics of and ideas behind Swords and Wizardry?
Okay, sure. Well, I guess a little bit of history first. It was originally written in 2007, came out in 2008. It's what's usually called a retroclone, in that it's a rewriting of an original rule set. This is the original rules for Dungeons and Dragons as they existed between 1974 and 1978. Which are, to my mind, some of the best Dungeons and Dragons rules that were ever published. But when they were written in 1974, it was the first role-playing game anyone had ever written, and so the presentation and the writing that was done in order to attempt to explain an RPG to people was fairly terrible in a lot of ways. And so the rewriting of it in 2007 is something that's a lot more familiar to people who pick up a book and trying to learn a role-playing game. There's been a lot of advancement in terms of how to write a role-playing game so that people will understand what they are reading, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
A lot of
so
changes.
so that's the background on what the game is. It's basically the zero edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and so a lot of people coming in playing fifth edition will they'll recognize the framework that's going on here, but it's a very different game. Once the differences in the rules get folded into it, it tends to create a different kind of playing environment, a very, very different sort of playing environment, but still similar. In many ways similar. It's the same at the core, but it's a very different implementation of of a D&D type game. So so that's the précis on the history of it, and and like I said, it's been around since about 2008. We've done several printings of it, and we're pretty much running out now of the current complete rule book, which is this, and also people will probably the PDF of that book is free out there, and so we're starting to run out. We took a look at it and said, well, okay, so are we gonna reprint the books? And we were like, well, let's try and do something that's a little more exciting than that, because for a while we've wanted to sort of give the Swords and Wizardry line its own more of a unique look than having it side by side with the fifth edition things that Frog God produces. And so I hate to say went back to the drawing board, but kind of that's what we did, and we said, okay, what should things look like? And we're like, okay, box set, because the original one came in a box set. That was kind of a no-brainer, except that box sets have tanked so many role-playing game companies that tried to produce them. It's death on Kickstarter.
Well, they're so expensive too.
Yeah, yeah, they really are, and you've got to be really careful. But we've got over a decade of experience, working with printers. We're not in the position of somebody who's just written something and then from scratch starts to try and figure out what are the various manufacturing issues that exist in terms of doing it. So we're comfortable doing a box set at this point for it, and so that's what we're going to do. We're switching the aspect ratio of everything from being letter sized to being digest sized. The box is digest sized like the original, and the modules, we're going to start coming out with modules that have sort of their own more Swords and Wizardry flavor to them. Those are going to be digest sized so that you can put them in your box, as you get stuff. We're going to be doing supplements to it. Probably half of those will be monsters. Half of them will be optional house rules that you can use with it, because it's a very house rulesable system. and probably some articles and things like that, and it'll all go in the box until you run out of box, and then we don't have any empty boxes, so everyone's screwed at that point when you run out of box. I don't know. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
It would be a problem of too much rather than too little support for it at that
It
point.
would.
Yes.
It's one of those problems you'd love to have.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Sounds like to me the Swords and Wizardry's collectible card edition a little bit.
Oh my god.
If only we could all have such problems.
I know, right? The collectible tabletop RPG. But yeah, that sounds like it sounds like a big project. And I know that Swords and Wizardry already has a lot of fan-made stuff like Hero's Journey First Edition, and you mentioned a number of others. So
Yep.
For those that have never played a retro D&D game and are like, oh, D&D 5th edition's my first D&D, what would you tell them about the differences and why they should go and try a retro like Swords and Wizardry over what they're playing now?
Sure. And I would say that the different retro clones have different effects to them and different sort of play styles. So I'm just going to focus on 5th edition and Swords and Wizardry as opposed to the other ones like Osric or Labyrinth Lord or Hero's Journey even.
Absolutely.
The big difference that Swords and Wizardry has from every edition later on is that there are the rules are not granular, by which I mean there is not a rule for every single thing that you do. In fact, for the most part, there are pretty much no rules whatsoever. For most things, you're going to expect to see a rule for. So if you decide to play it and you learn with 5th edition, the first thing that your first reaction when you look at this game is going to be, this is just incomplete. Where are the rules for this? Where are the rules for, do I make a perception check to see a thing? Where is it? Well, it's just because you're telling me what you're seeing in the room, and I'll, and the DM will decide, do you see it? Where are you looking? It's a game of where are you looking rather than do I make a perception check. If I'm trying to persuade a monster, not to attack me, where's the rule for that? And it's just there's not one, and that's okay. There's a sort of an I get it moment, that usually happens when you're like, okay, it's just, what do I do? We're talking through this with somebody, with the DM, and it's just a sort of a matter of where do we end up in terms of, have I got a compelling reason for this dragon, not to eat me at this time? And so and so that'll be the first thing that you see, is that you think it's incomplete. And it's not. It's just that there are a lot of things where it's way stepped back into the human interaction of this stuff. And that gives you some emergent effects from playing the game as well. So, for example, the combat's a lot quicker because it doesn't have the I do this named thing, then this named thing, then this named thing, and I get this result. Rather than having that, it expects you to just say something like, I jump up, I swing on the chandelier, and I'm going to kick him with both feet. And then it's like, and right, there are no rules for jumping up to the chandelier, swinging and kicking both feet, but you might just be like, okay, let's call it, if you roll a 9 through 12 on 3d6, you're going to, succeed in doing that. You just make up the probabilities. And so combat moves a lot more quickly. And one of the results of that one doesn't really expect is that since combat is quicker, it gives you more time to do certain other things that are fun in a fantasy role-playing game that tend to get left out in more complicated role-playing game systems. So, for example, exploring, making a map of a dungeon that may have several empty rooms in it, which you generally don't see in later editions. But yeah, there'd be some empty rooms. You may find that there is some sort of tactical layout of these rooms where that because you heard some goblins in this room, that you can actually get around behind them from 2 different directions, or where you want to run away to because you've spent a lot of time mapping. And that's time that would be somewhat wasted in 5th edition relative to the combat. Most people are not interested in spending a lot of time mapping because you want to have a certain number of combats, in a game session, And if they take a long time, then you've got less time for other things to coordinate. There's a lot more emphasis on puzzle solving, not so much because of the time reason, but because since you don't have specific rules that point you in the direction of being able to solve a puzzle or not. So, for example, in 5th edition, you have an intelligence check that you can make to figure out what the purpose of a thing working might be. Whereas in the older rules, you're generally going to get something like, well, here's a description of, sort of what it looks like. And then somebody is like, oh, that's such and such. We had one really funny game where we were at a convention game, and my players they were working at this thing, they were checking it, they were finding out, asking questions, this and that. And they finally managed to get the treasure at the bottom of it. And then somebody said, you know what? We just spent an hour and a half figuring out how to open a child-proof cap. Because what you had to do was push down on the top of it and then turn it, and that was what it was. So you get a very different, that we just spent an hour and a half trying to figure out how to open a stone child-proof cap is one sort of thing. And then in 5th edition, you would get it would have certainly happened a lot faster, because there would have been the whole you make a perception check that the thing pushes down, you make an intelligence check that the thing, if it turns in some way, that's in some way going to reflect how it opens. It's just a different sort of procedure in terms of following the puzzle, so that's very different as well. So I guess those are my two, the exploration and the puzzle solving, I think, are the two big things that people coming to the game from 5th edition will probably find that for some of them that offers a much richer gaming experience, whereas other people, of course, just prefer granular rules. And so that they want to have certain things that they can do because it tailors their character to what it is that they want to do. So you're looking at two different types of games entirely, but some people will prefer the one in which it's just the human interaction of, I think you're going to know this, and back and forth, rather than having the rules already set for various categories of things.
Absolutely. I definitely agree that in older editions, you saw a lot more puzzles, because fighting was quicker, and also just it was less granular as it was moving forward, and now a lot of the newer ones are trying to program so that they can write it so that they can program it into computer games, which needs to become that very modular aspect. So it definitely will take a different mindset. I remember some very memorable puzzles that we've done over the decades, because we had the time and the capability by comparison. So that sounds really cool.
Another thing on just, and it's pretty minor for some of us, but on that older school, and I think that this game covers it both ways, dice. High and low, correct, is what you're targeting, which for some people it blows their minds.
Yeah, there's the concept of elegance in a game system, and so for example, if you take 3rd edition D&D, 3rd edition D&D was a very elegant system. It had one resolution mechanic. Better was always adding, worse was always subtracting. Everything folded into this thing, with modifiers and so on and so forth. Swords and Wizardry is utterly inelegant. There are lots of different subsystems in it. Sometimes you might be trying to roll under your attribute in order to do something. It's a commonly used way of doing it. Sometimes you're going to want to be rolling high. Sometimes you're going to be wanting to roll low. 5th edition sort of hits in the middle of those two. It's because the thing is that elegant does not necessarily mean good. It just means that it's elegant, that it's a single sort of approach to the way that something is done. And 5th edition introduces more subsystems to it than 3rd edition did, so it is less elegant, and in order, deliberately done so by the designers to make it a better and more playable game, they decided to reduce the amount of elegance that was in the system. And in Swords and Wizardry, it is even less elegant. There are lots and lots of different subsystems that. Now, one thing about an inelegant game is it's usually easier to house rule it, because you can change one thing, and it's got a relatively small part of the game that's going to mess with. And if it's small enough, you can predict pretty much all of the different things that's going to screw with. If you were playing third edition and you house ruled something, it could cause some sort of weird effect way over here in another entirely different part of the game where you suddenly throw things off entirely. And, one of the, examples that I, used to give people was, you can't just chop the skill system out of third edition D&D, because when the players are making their characters, they are looking at a system that has all these skills. They're making, decisions about, giving up on one thing in order to have a higher skill in another thing. And so, even at the character creation level, you're tending to screw things up. And so people who are playing fifth edition could probably see that, you can change some things and it won't wreck the whole thing. And it's even less so in Swords and Wizardry. It's virtually impossible to wreck the Swords and Wizardry system. So,
well, and just like speaking of subsystems, one of my favorite, I started back in first edition and second edition. I loved the thief class, which later became the rogues, because they have subsystems on what they can do, and you've got that right here. This is before, like I said, I started in first edition, and so I never got to play these sets. But thieves get climb walls, detecting traps, hearing sounds, hiding in shadows, move silently, and open locks. And your race will modify those, and so depending on the thief that you're envisioning, you might say racially, this one's really interesting to me. And that was something that I always loved about making those characters.
Right. And that's, the thief is one of the clearest freestanding subsystems in the older versions, because no other character class had a percentage-based set of general skills involved with it. That was what thieves did. It was their thing.
And another way of putting it is that it becomes a much more modular system, that you can build your building blocks like Legos, and you can say, I want to take this piece out, but it's all stuck together still, so the Legos are fine. I'm going to go change this out for something else, and it makes for a lot easier for some people. And so it's something definitely that is a different mindset and could be really fun for people to try. I do want to point out that we are going to be putting a link in the description below, so you can go and get your own free copy, absolutely free copy of the PDF, but of the Swords and Wizardry core book. But make sure that you check it out, and then you can go and see if you want to invest in more of it.
And I just want to say, pay what you want or free products, a lot of times you might pick them up because they're there. Then you might just kind of file them away and not look at them a whole lot, because you're like, well, I didn't put anything into this, so therefore I've already gotten my money's worth. However, on this, you've got, I think it's 144 pages, about half of it's player, half of it's GM content. The art is fantastic from the cover, which I think Alice has down in that corner. I opened this up on my iPad at work the other day, and I had a coworker look over, and immediately he struck up a conversation, having some idea what I was looking at. He was like, "Oh, is that one of those OGL D&D things?" And He and his group have played since ages on, and they get together only once in a while and do it now. But we talk for about 20 minutes about gaming experiences, and because I think that covers really evocative of the old style. The interior art that's black and white is fantastic. Monsters, you've got, over 20 pages of monsters, I think, with about 6 to 9 entries per page. And that's what you're getting in the box set, is all that stuff put into a beautiful printed digest format. And I mean, it's pretty exciting after looking through it.
And also for GMs that are accustomed to GMing some of the newer systems or some more crunchier systems, and you want to throw back to some older stuff, realize that the monster entries in this game are very short. You don't have these page-long things that you have to read through and go to the minutia of this and this ability and then this ability and this ability. It's short little blocks of stuff, and so you can throw stuff at your players a lot faster. So I really liked that.
Let me jump in on one thing about the pay what you want, because I just discovered that on drive-through we've got this set on pay what you want. Don't pay for it in the drive-through. If you're getting the core rule, if you're getting this thing right here, we're not asking people to pay for it. We're not asking people to contribute. Back when we did the Kickstarter for this particular book, it was one of the stretch goals that we would make it free to everybody. So it's a glitch that we've got it on pay what you want. We're not asking any contribution, for that. It's free. That's from us to you. Don't feel like you need to put back in.
First sample's free.
Right, exactly.
Well, before we wrap this up, is there anything anybody would like to add?
Oh, just I had a couple questions, just real quick. You don't have to get too detailed, but talking about subsystems and such, I saw that there's aerial combat, ship combat, mass combat, and siege combat. Are those all in their own subsystems and such that you've got?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Now, because that's the way they were.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
That's really awesome that they're all modular, so you can adjust and house roll it.
And they've also got, like the hirelings that you can get, like hiring a sage or an armorer and such, because that was a big part of the original game, was that at a certain level, you're just going to make a fort, and now you're going to be the quest givers, and you've got other people. And so I have all these friends that, have played, and they have stories, and I have some of them, but that their characters and then their hirelings and such became their next character. And they have 100 years in this campaign world where it's not playing out every single moment, but that you come in every couple of years, play some characters, have a good time, and that they're super attached. I'm super attached to some of my characters that I haven't played in 30 years. Still.
Oh,
yeah, I mean that was.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that. Yeah, that was the end game. As it was perceived, was that you would get on the map. You would have a little fort with your character's name on it, and then that one was pretty much done. And it's a pretty lethal system. So if you got somebody up to 9th or 11th level, you were ready to quit at that point. You were like, okay, I make my mark. I'm on the map. And it's the henchmen that are going out there, and maybe my, wizard's tower will become better known and stuff, but I'm going to do that without risking my life in adventures and in going out in adventures, because I've won the game, with this character at this point. So it's, that's it.
And referencing earlier on when you were talking about how originally the way that it was written was not very streamlined for the way that people would need in order to play. I love looking at the character creation and looking at some of the rules. It's much more hand-holdy. So you definitely get a step-by-step versus you having to go and do something and then you flip and go look for a chart and go, wait, which chart was I supposed to go to? So I love that because the chart's right there underneath the exact stat you need. You never have to flip 30 pages or go to a separate pamphlet, those back in the pamphlet days.
Yeah, there's no question. I don't think anyone would say that the first try at writing an RPG matches up with the 1000th try once people have figured out this is the best way to present this kind of information.
Well, oh, go ahead, Elsa.
I was just going to say, you've done a great job looking at it. I'm very excited to get my hands into it more.
And I think the Kickstarter shows that. I mean, you guys had a pledge of that you were asking for 12,000. You're at 64,000, almost 65 at this point. 912 backers, still 23 days to go. And so you guys are kind of knocking down stretch goals at this point. Most of those I see are being digitally delivered instead of new things being added to the print.
Yeah, it's very, very rare for Frog God to put up physical items in stretch goals because, again, of the risk of doing that. And especially in this case, since we've got a quote from printers about what's going to be in the box. But there's sort of a funny story about that. The reason why we don't put physical stretch goals in there is because way back when our Rappin' Athic Kickstarter was delayed for 3 months because of a single die that was supposed to go into each set, and the people delivering these dice didn't get them to us in time, and it caused a 3-month delay on a Kickstarter where that was an infinitesimal little fragment of what it was that people were getting, and so we don't do that now.
Makes sense.
And I think that it makes a lot of sense that here's the product, and we'll give you more, but we're not going to put it in this. Let alone, we were talking earlier about the dangers of box sets and how they have been lethal to some companies. But I love them. I still have a bunch of mine down on my shelves, and
Oh, everybody loves them. I mean, there's no question everyone loves box sets, but it's just they're dangerous to do. And, those digital goals will probably get into physical form at some point, but that'll be through a different, an Indiegogo or something like that, where we can control, what are the costs on this thing, and not just try and throw more and more physical stuff into something, when you haven't really planned for it. We're a lot bigger on this Kickstarter than we're already raised more than we thought we were going to in the whole thing. So we're ahead on the stretch goals. Definitely not going to do that thing where you have a really powerful Kickstarter and you panic and try and give away more and more and more stuff, and then end up not being able to deliver anything at all because you overpromised what you were going to do. And that's a pattern that we've all seen in Kickstarters.
Yes.
Or just, here's some swag that have nothing to do with it. I don't need my coffee mug. I don't need the T-shirt. What I want is this product that I'm actually pledging on.
Right.
And
go ahead, Alice.
And it creates a lot more value the way that you're doing it, because people can come in at a lower price point because they don't have to pay for all that material and material components of making a hard copy, and they can get a lot more out of it. So that's also an awesome part.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You always have to gauge between, we can give you more cool stuff, but we have to charge you more. And our approach to this game has always been relatively minimalist in terms of that. That's like, we give away the PDF for free. We want people to be able to get into it and play it without it being some sort of luxury commodity that you have to pay $1 billion and you get something that's super cool, but nobody else can afford it. So we try and hit that middle ground at the less deluxe level than a lot of people, I think, do.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. It was super informative on Swords and Wizardry, and I have never played it, but Rapanathuk I have heard so many horror stories of. It is probably, I think, the biggest killer in 3rd edition D&D, from what I've heard.
Yeah, and the part of it, I obviously didn't write that. I only wrote probably about 10% of it, but mine is the Zelkor's Ferry Mouth of Doom section of Rapanathuk. So when you hear people talking about Zelkor's Ferry, that's one of the parts that I wrote. So.
So when I finally get to play that, if I die in that section, I can blame you.
Yes, you can, and I will not feel bad at all. That's the other thing about the old type rules, and it's an emergent phenomenon. Since it only takes about 5 minutes to make a character, 8 minutes to make a character. It doesn't much matter, if one of them dies. It's not, you don't have the sort of social contract between the DM and the players that, I'm going to go pretty loose on your characters, because if I kill you, we're going to be spending 40 minutes, with you sitting out working on a new character. It's so fast, that it tends to be, in general, in whoever's hands, more lethal. And that's why I won't feel bad if you die in the Zelkor's Ferry Mouth of Doom.
I'll make sure to christen my character sheet very quickly, start spilling stuff all over it very quickly, because that's the way to keep them from dying.
I don't think Alice would ever let me run that then, because I don't remember this, but I am told I killed somebody's character 3 times in one game session.
In one day.
They were different characters each time that he came in, and I remember 2 times. I'll own up to that, but I really don't remember the 3rd.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Matt. You actually gave us a great insight into Swords and Wizardry, and I hope that viewers go and buy your product and go and get in on that Kickstarter ASAP. So.
Like I said, at this moment, it's got 23 days to go, so that means that you guys are closing up on what day?
I think it's on a Tuesday.
Wednesday, March 4th.
Wednesday, March 4th.
Wednesday, cool. Okay.
And we'll be making a character creation coming up, so make sure you go and check that out. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.